This week we celebrate a fascinating saint whose name is Saint Anthony of the Desert, or Saint Anthony the Hermit. Have we heard of Saint Anthony the Hermit or Saint Anthony of the Desert? Now there are various Saint Anthonys in the church. This is not the Franciscan Saint Anthony of the 13th century, the patron saint of lost articles. This is not the same Saint Anthony. This is Saint Anthony the Hermit. Often in iconography he's depicted wearing a long black robe like a monk, usually with the hood up. He's usually depicted with a long beard, and sometimes he's depicted with a bell, or with a book, or with a pig standing beside him. So if you look at art, that's the way to be able to recognize Saint Anthony. He's the patron saint of persons with skin diseases. We've heard of shingles. Shingles is also known as Saint Anthony's fire. Saint Anthony's fire, shingles. He's also the patron saint of brush makers and of basket makers. I don't know how many brush makers and basket makers we have left in this world, in a world of manufacturing. But he's also the patron saint of grave diggers. So of those who dig graves for many centuries, Saint Anthony has been their special patron saint. What do we know about Saint Anthony? Saint Anthony was born somewhere around 251 AD. 251, so that's at the time when it was still illegal to be Christian. And he died in around 356 AD, so that was after the time that Christianity was legal. So he was living during a fascinating time in the history of the church. How it was that when he was born, it was illegal to be a Christian. You could be persecuted. By the time that he died, Christianity was being used to unite the empire, and so it was a very different situation. What happened is Christianity was being used to unite the empire. There were a lot of people who were really disgusted with the church. Why? Because the church was starting to mirror civil society. Now that Christianity was legal, now that it was permissible to be a Christian, the bishops of the church started to look more and more like the royal officials, and the church started reflecting the civil society. And so many people just saw all of the pomp and the circumstance and the riches of the church and said, this cannot be what Christ intended. What did some of them do? They left the cities and they went out, where? Into the desert. St. Anthony was from the country of Egypt. So imagine going out and living in the desert for the rest of your life. Goodbye husband, goodbye wife, goodbye kids, goodbye mom and dad. I'm going to go out and live in the desert. Wow. For them, it was all part of this context. We remember, step back in time. They were thinking at that time there was this Manichaean dualism of things that were good and bad, right and wrong. We divided things into two pieces, right? We called them dualisms or dichotomies. And one dichotomy, or one dualism, was that between body and spirit. So if things were either good or bad, is the body going to be good or bad, and is the spirit going to be good or bad? Which of those is going to be good and which is going to be bad? We came to believe that the spirit was good. Anything spiritual is good. And what is bad? According to that Manichaean, which is a heresy, dualism, anything that dealt with the body was bad. Think about it for a moment. What do we do during Lent? We fast. Why do we fast from food? Why do we deny our bodies the food and the nourishment that they need? Because we believed that the body was bad. All sorts of temptations, including sexual temptations throughout the centuries of the history of the church. We've looked at the body and things relating to the body, things like sex, as being bad and as being taboo. St. Anthony lived as part of all of that context, which means what? They were thinking that they were going to flee this world and go out into the desert to focus on the spiritual. Buddy?
So the Catholic Church, that's why they become a priest and they can't have any wives or anything.
Excellent question. So celibacy in the Roman Catholic Church, where are the roots of celibacy in the Roman Catholic Church? And that whole idea that the body is bad and the sex is bad. Yikes. These ideas continue to influence the way that we think, even now in the 21st century, right? Oh my, so many taboos that we still have yet to overcome in the 21st century. So St. Anthony was part of all of that context when it was at the height. The body is bad, the spirit is good. Let's go pursue the spiritual. And instead of doing it here inside the city, let's go out into the desert of Egypt they were living in. And so it was said by one biographer at that time that there were more people living out in the desert trying to be holy than there were living in the cities. St. Anthony, it's a fascinating story because he himself lived inside the city and lived a rather well-off life until he went to Mass one day and heard a sermon on Matthew chapter 19, verse 21, where in the Gospel, Jesus tells his disciples, "Sell your possessions, give to the poor, and follow Christ." And so what did he do? Took those words literally. He sold his possessions, he gave everything away to the poor, and he followed Christ. Can we think of other saints in the history of the church who've done the same thing? St. Francis of Assisi, have you heard of him? St. Francis of Assisi heard the same sorts of words from the gospel and decided to take those words literally. I'm going to literally sell everything I have. I'm going to literally give everything away, and I'm going to try to follow Christ in my life. And so that's a bit of the story of St. Anthony, whom the church celebrates every January the 17th. Most of what we know about St. Anthony comes to us from another saint who wrote the biography of St. Anthony. That was St. Athanasius. Have we heard of that name before? St. Athanasius wrote the life of St. Anthony, and it was really St. Anthony going off and living in the desert that influenced Western monasticism. So here in the West, in Western Spain, in what became parts of the New World when we came across, our ideas of monasticism were very much influenced by these stories of St. Anthony leaving everything and going out into the desert, selling all that he had, living this poor life dedicated to prayer. The other stories we have of St. Anthony are of him being tempted by demons. Have we seen any of those paintings of St. Anthony? Usually we'll see paintings of St. Anthony sort of like filled with all of these demons who are attacking him. Back within that worldview, in a world that believed in demons, it's fascinating because now we're studying the Gospel of John. It is a parish on Wednesday evenings. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all talk about demons. Demons and Jesus casting out demons and the demons speaking with Jesus. The Gospel of John, a more advanced gospel, does he even mention demons? He has no place in his world, in his psychology, for demons. Interesting, because for those of us in the 21st century, many of us have maybe seen a lot of mental illnesses, maybe even psychiatric illnesses. Have you ever seen a demon? Has a demon with horns and wings ever come and attacked you in the middle of the night? It's a different world view. But back when St. Anthony was living, they believed that demons were real. And were as real and as physical as Mario is in this room. Right? That the demons could attack me in that same sort of way. So how it was that within that worldview then, all these stories cropped up about how it was that St. Anthony fought off various temptations. What were some of the principal temptations that he had in the desert? According to the story, the two big temptations he had were boredom and laziness. Think about the temptations of boredom and laziness in our own lives, right?
But what else did they have to do in the desert?
Like, what else do you have to do in the desert? You can't exactly do a lot in the desert, right? So boredom and laziness, very good, Margie. There's not a lot to do in the desert. And then the other principal ones were sexual temptations. There are all sorts of stories of phantoms of very lovely women come to him. If you were to Google St. Anthony, you get all sorts of images of him being tempted in several ways. So the temptation of Anthony, I believe, is an important lesson for us to reflect on the temptations in our own lives. What are the greatest temptations in your life? Next week we jump into ordinary time, but in a month we come back to Lent, which is a season of Jesus being in the desert. Remember that the Gospels were written in that same sort of context where they believed that Jesus was tempted. What are you tempted by? Not Satan coming to you in the flesh and tempting you and saying, jump off this cliff and God will save you. Not those sorts of big, dramatic temptations, but just in your daily life, what are the temptations? The temptations that we all face of doing certain things, of saying certain things that could damage our relationship with God and or with others. We're all tempted. St. Anthony then is a model for us of resisting temptation. So St. Anthony we celebrate every January the 17th as a church.